Let's turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 34, and we're looking at verses 13 through 29. Boy, it's this really, I would call it a bizarre story. And really, guys, my intent here is to try to give an explanation of why what is happening is happening. So that's, please just take it as that, and it's an opinion. But before I make any comments this morning, why don't we go ahead and read the text, and by review, so we can kind of refresh our minds a bit. Verses 13 through, just go ahead and read 13 through 31. And why don't we read 13 through 31? So if somebody want to lead out, we'll get started.
Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and to his father Hamor. They said to them, "We can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who's not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go."
Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man, who was the most honored of all his father's family, lost no time in doing what they said, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to the men of their city. "These men are friendly towards us," they said. "Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised, as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let us agree to their terms, and they will settle among us."
All the men who assembled at the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem. Every male who assembled at the city gate was circumcised, and 3 days, when they were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and went to the unsuspecting city and slaughtered every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with a sword, took Dinah from Shechem's house, and left. Jacob's sons killed them and looted the city because their sister had been violated. They took their flocks, herds, and donkeys, as well as everything in the city and in the surrounding fields. They captured as plunder all their wealth, all their little ones, and their wives, including everything in the houses.
And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?"
Well, I wonder if they thought they got even. I don't know. All right. Well, let's. Again, every time I read that, I'm appalled, and I think you are too. We tend to read the scriptures. We tend to think in terms of who's the good guys in the story and who are the bad guys, and that's just part of how we're. It very much ingrained in us in human being and. As a human being, and especially in our culture. We're actually going to talk about this a little bit more later, but I'm kind of challenging that, not because I need to challenge it, but boy, when we see the apparent good guys, the people of God, acting in this manner, we really have to question what is going on, and that's why I've spent so much time on this because I think it's so interesting and so strangely familiar to us as human beings in our experience. What we, something that starts so small can end up so disastrous. And I think we probably all have stories of things, not to this degree, but things that, especially in our church context, of we just shake our head. How and what are these people thinking in this whole thing? And so anyway, by way of review, we talked last week. What I'm trying to do is build a framework to help us understand. And so last week was the groundwork. Steve had mentioned the circles. This week we're going to take that idea a little further. But again, to refresh our minds, I'm going to propose to you that these guys and the men of Shechem are operating out of two different circles. They're two different levels of awareness of what is going on. We could call it growth. Two different perception models. Two different worlds is they're operating out of. And so that's where this is all going. And so I started kind of at the grassroots last week and just talked about, I want to give you a physical model of this idea of growth, is that we are not all the same. People are operating from different perceptions. We could call that growth levels. So in the physical realm, we know that a toddler is physically smaller than a grown man, a fully mature man, and a seasoned man, is not as physically large as the man in his prime. Okay, I'm taking that as a simple idea, and what the P represents is the physical growth that is apparent relative to the other two. So the physical growth of the toddler, or almost toddler, he's getting up there, is small compared to the mature man in his prime, and is greater than the seasoned man on the physical scale. And so I identified 4 different areas of growth and development in a human, and I think there's more, but I pulled, because this is a Bible study, I pulled Luke 2:52, where it's talked about Jesus growing in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. So I picked up 4, physical being 1, spiritual, relational, and then this idea of C, which I'm using as your conscious level of awareness, which I think is really, really critical. In fact, I would tend to think that the other 3 are actually informed by this. We tend to see the world by how we frame the world. So that's what we talked about. And then to give a graphic as an illustration, the C here is illustrated in this, is what we talked about last week. This guy is walking down the bike path. And he passes, he's got this view, he's viewing this whole thing. But as he's walking, he sees the German Shepherd, and it reminds him of Kelly, his dog when he was a boy. And it brings back, oh man, that dog looks just like Kelly. And brings back all of these minds. And so here, his perception, what's in the realm of possibility as far as his perception is this, but in his mind as he processes it, this is kind of, really kind of immaterial to our discussion. It's a suggestion of what's happening in the brain as it's processing this information. These are neurons and so forth. But what he sees is Kelly. He could, in his area of view, he's seeing this, but what he's really seeing is this. He's seeing Kelly. And he goes home that night and says, honey, what'd you do? They all walked on the bike path, and I saw a dog just like Kelly. See, another illustration of this is, I heard a guy talking about, he's a therapist, and he was talking about this work he was doing with this younger man, married, fairly newly married, but they had a small boy, a toddler, like that little boy. And this man, younger man, young dad, had a real issue with lying. And he would lie to he'd lie to his wife, and it was driving them apart. I mean, obviously it was killing the marriage. So what this young man did is he called his wife on the phone. It was a Thursday afternoon at work and said, "Honey, I have to work late tonight. I just can't make it home." And really what he was planning on doing is going out with his buddies at work and going out partying, going bar hopping for that evening. And of course, when he got home at 10, 11 o'clock at night, his wife knew exactly what was going on and of course caught him in the lie. And so the therapist was trying to get this guy, trying to get inside his head. What are you thinking here? And so he says, okay, when you were on the phone with your wife, weaving this lie of why you had to work late, what was on your screen? Okay, this really is helpful. Think about it as you, all of us right now have a screen. We have a screen in front of us. And this is helpful to me. And so he asked him, where was your wife on the screen? As you were talking with your wife on the phone, where in the picture was your wife? Well, his wife wasn't there. He was talking to his wife, and his wife wasn't even on his screen. Where was your little boy? Oh, well, he was kind of off over here on the screen. Well, what was on your screen? Well, my buddies, and we're going out, we're going to go out and party. He was framed in his mind to such a point. He was so enamored with what he was enamored with, he totally dismissed everything else. And guys, this is so typical of us human beings. What is possible here is only in the realm of possibility, but what captures our attention is our perception of what that is all about. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so that was review 1. Review 2, as we talked about these circles of growth, we're talking about growth, and I'm suggesting it's only one idea. In the model that I've been working with, there are 7 stages of growth that we go through. And we start in the center, and as we grow as an individual, we expand out. Our circle gets larger. Our world gets larger. And there are 5 things that are true regarding all of these stages. Number 1 is that growth is a staged process. I've never read a person who didn't believe that it's a staged process. Do you realize that this lot of this thinking started in the 15th century with Teresa of Avila, Christian mystic of the 15th century. She's quoted many, many times, and she actually has informed both Christian and secular and other religious thinkers regarding how she described this whole process. She used the term mansions. She didn't use stages. She talked about moving through various mansions of growth. And so, again, I'm thinking in circles, in how I'm describing this, these concentric circles. Number 2, we are able to understand only one stage beyond. Now, we have glimpses. Obviously, we have glimpses. We may have a spiritual experience that really thrusts us into another realm, but as water tends to settle back and find its own level, so do we. Unless we are moving in all aspects of growth, we'll tend to settle back. So we can become aware, but we tend to settle into one realm and operate out of one frame of reference. Human tendency is to reject, ignore, or fight that which we don't understand. And that I gave the explanation of one explanation of why the prophets were killed, because the people in those days just thought they were from the moon. They could not relate to them. It also gives explanation of why Jesus was crucified. Now, outside of the whole theological plan of God, just bear with me here, but from the human perspective, thank you, David. Number 4, there is a wounding that must occur. We don't just graduate, get a diploma, and move from the stages, but there is a wounding or a loss that must occur in order for us to move. Therein lies, except a grain of wheat fall into the ground and die. We call it death to self, and I think rightly so. It's a death, wounding loss that requires faith. But as we allow ourselves to let go, we have the promise of resurrection, which is an amazing thing. Number 5, our current stage, wherever we are, is indicated by our ability to forgive and include the prior stages. We find that we become a more patient, we're less quick to judge, and we tend to be able to hold paradox and tensions more comfortably. And we will sit back and we will wait instead of responding my way or the highway. I mean, and so because our perception, our view of things has become larger, we don't have to agree with those, but we can hold those in tension without making judgment in that regard. So that are the 5 things that are generally true about this whole idea. So that's the whole model, what is true. Now let's look at some specifics. Before I do, this is really interesting to me, is that it's right there. Yeah. Yeah, just stand there. This has all kinds of ramifications, but I learned that, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a psychologist by any means, but what I've come to understand is that some hold the idea that at the time of 18 months, sometime after 18 months old, is when a child first becomes self-aware. That before that time, they're just part of mother. This is so interesting to me, is that at 18 months, what this does here, evidence for increased self-awareness, as the well-known infant researcher Daniel Stern knows, at about 18 months, children begin to show evidence of self-awareness. Now, this is going to tie in here in just a minute. This evidence includes infant behavior in front of the mirror, their use of verbal labels for self, and empathetic acts. And then it goes on, prior to the age of 18 months, infants do not seem to know that what they are seeing in the mirror is their own reflection. And then he goes on and explains an experiment and how they proved that whole thing. And I'm going to just leave that there. So now we're talking 0 to 18 months. Is that part of mother? But then we start to develop as a human being. And I would then say that we enter what is called stage 1. And stage 1 is the center of the circle right here. Stage 1, and I've got it blown up here. And in my world, in my frame of reference, I call stage 1 protection and pleasure. This is where, I've got a little commentary there. Protection and pleasure rule one's beliefs and actions. 2 things, protection and pleasure. Ego is at the center of this. It's as a toddler. I mean, we understand the toddler coming into the room full of people, totally naked, just dancing, and we all laugh, and it's all about me and my body, and you know, everything revolves around me, totally clueless. But now when that same kind of thing happens in a 40-year-old man, we we think that is really sad. It is not about you. There's got to be movement beyond that. But if we look at if we look at advertising, guys, this is where advertising is geared. It will protect you. My product will protect you, or it will give you pleasure. And you just start looking at the ads on TV. Those of you who watch TV, it's or in magazines or wherever you look, the advertising market, I believe, is targeted to level 1. Why? Because it's capturing the most amount of target. We all start there. But we have to move beyond that. Meaning is found in externalities, in having pleasurable experiences and ventures, and in owning important things, expensive things. Dick was talking about his project. He's putting these very cool silver belt buckles together. They sound so cool. And they're wonderful gifts, but they're also very expensive and targeted to a specific market in that. Well, now having a gift like that would be a wonderful experience, but you know, certainly we can move beyond the point where I don't gain my identity in owning that, but it's something pleasurable and reminds me of something. So, and then what this circle shows in a blown up picture is that the way out, the way to move beyond this, here's the exit sign, is through the only way out is through this darkness that you have to go through, and the TOF is what I call the threshold of fear. This is true of every stage, is that as we approach this area, there's something inside it wells up. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just stay in here. And we tend our natural affinities and movement is to stay within here. It's only this idea of a greater pull that causes ourselves to die to the point and let go. In stage 1, it's, gee, maybe there's more to pleasure and protection in life. Maybe I ought to move on. But it's not a cognizant view. It's not an intellectual decision. It involves our entire being, you know, our emotions and our intellect and our moral choices, and to start to think beyond myself to something bigger. It's a death experience. And I know everyone here, we've gone through that stage, and we're now have developed into something more as a human being. But this is definitely stage 1. And then stage 2, we move on, and I call stage 2, and I've coined this term, the tribal 2. Tribal 2 because it's stage 2. And again, the same common denominators of movement out, the greater pull, the death experience. But what this stage, once we move from stage 1 to stage 2, there's a high need here for acceptance. This is the first time that the toddler is now moving, and he starts to recognize, oh, there's others in my life. Notice the pre-toddler, 18 months, is I'm not even aware of self. And then self becomes the center point and about protecting and pleasure. And then there's a movement. We go, gee, I've got other people in my life. And I care about what these other people in my life are, how they're looking at me. When mom frowns at me, that makes me not feel very good. When mom smiles at me, I feel good, see? Or dad, see? And so at this level, stage 2 is about acceptance. And it's about what is it those feeding back to me, as I'm receiving feedback from the others in my life, what is it that pleases them and what is it that displeases them? And then I crunch all that stuff up, and I want to become like those things. Thus the beginning of the shadow self, the false self that I think Paul talked greatly about. This self that has to be accepted, and it's who we think we ought to be or who others want us to be. And this starts at a very young age, in again, from my perspective. Now we're going to tie this to the brothers here. But suppression of the denial of the negative is very important, because the negative aspect, we call it fighting sin. We fight sin, and we that which is outside of what is acceptable to me is negative, and I fight that. This is the heroic Christian journey. This is the heroic where we have to overcome through willpower and conquer, and where it's important for me to be in the right church and hang around and read the right authors and go to the right conferences and believe all the right things, because I want to be accepted. I want to be a good guy. I want to wear a white hat, and everything outside of what I have been taught is now negative. And this really is about tribalism. This is setting up the dualistic kind of thing that drives much of our culture, the good guys and the bad guys. We call them in the political realm, this side, the leftists and the rightists. We have all kinds of, this is about naming and labeling. Is he conservative? Some of you are wondering that about me right now. Is he safe? You know? But this dramatically informs how we interact with other people and how we interact our relationship with God. It views everything. We have very much on this side and this side, and we're operating on this frame of reference. But I can't face who I really am because it's too scary. And so what we have are, guys, in the Christian realm, churches full of us pretending and posturing and trying to be something that we think we ought to be, and we all feel like we're failing. But we can't show that, because we can't embrace the negative. We can't do that. Does that? I mean, you may not agree with me, but at least you understand what I'm saying. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm going to continue on next week, and I'm just going to talk about the first 4 layers, the first 4 spheres, because I think both groups, the brothers and the men of Shechem, land in the first 4. We're not going to do all 7, but we're going to finish this out. And what I'm proposing to do is to build a case that these guys are operating out of a certain stage of understanding. They have been given an amazing revelation by God Almighty, but it's like putting a 16-year-old kid in a Corvette and saying, go have fun. A wonderful gift, but the 16-year-old kid has no idea of how to use that wonderful gift responsibly. What are the chances of something negative to happen? Pretty high. So that's the position I'm taking on this. And so let's just bear with me. Let's have some fun with it. You don't have to agree with me, but at least it's one explanation of why this story ends in such disaster. We'll see you next week.
Mike kind of reminds me